post-war world and India. After of the Second World War, the impact of the Second World War was different for different countries. In economic terms, too, the USSR and other European countries lost heavily with the destruction of cities, factories and mines on a massive scale. In contrast, the USA suffered less as the wars was not fought on its territories. In fact, the Second World War helped USA growing out of its economic misery caused by the Great Depression. This ensured full employment and high productivity in US during the Second World War. Even the war devastated countries rebuilt their economics. The world saw some new processes in place. Three of the most important processes were the establishment of United Nations, Cold War and decolonization. United Nations Organization UNO. The principal allied countries like Britain, France, USA, USSR and China drafted a charter for the formation of the UNO. Even as the war drew to an end, the charter not only emphasized the need to preserve peace and prevent wars, but also the need to ensure human rights, democracy and eradication of poverty and hunger for all people in the world. The UN thus started with a twin objective of ensuring lasting peace and human development. At the time of its establishment, UN had membership of 54 countries and today there are 193 countries. The UN works through 6 different organs, which of each these organs has specific function like maintaining peace and security, improving education and health facilities, alleviating poverty, providing justice in the context of international crimes and so on. Some bodies responsible for these functions include International Court of Justice located in Hague, the World Health Organization located in Geneva, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization functioning from Paris, and United Nations Children's Emergency Fund functioning from the New York. In electing the Secretary General, the main officer of the UN, all nation participant and the post is rotated across different continents. However, decisions relating to the war and peace and taken in Security Council and 5 nations have special status within it. These are called permanent members of the Security Council and are China, France, United Kingdoms, USSR, now Russia and USA. The special powers also have given the great powers a special role and responsibility in preserving world peace. While the UN has been doing commendable work in the area of education, health, culture, exchange and protection of heritage, it has been less successful in preventing wars. The two camps and the Cold War 1945-1991. Two major ideological and political camps merged in the post-war period, the Communist bloc led by the USSR and the Democratic Capitalist bloc led by the USA on one hand, and USSR promoted the ideas of equality and state-controlled development and suppression of opposition to these principles. On the other hand, USA promoted the ideas of multi-party democracy and private capitalist controlled process of development. The two blocs competed each other for bringing all intermediate countries in their blocs. For more than 45 years after the Second World War, a rather strange war was fought between the two blocs. Instead, a war was fought behind closed doors through propaganda and words. It is called Cold War simply because of the absence of the real fighting as in traditional wars. This Cold War, characterized by intense tension between the United States and the USSR, influenced and shaped almost everything that happened in the world between 1945 and 1991. This division turned ethnically similar people and geographically adjacent territories into the enemies, and it led to wasteful wars between these centuries. Some main tactics used during the Cold War included proxy wars, military alliances, and arms race. Proxy war. The right from the outset of the two countries tried to bring the countries fighting for freedom under their sphere of influence. This led to supporting the two opposing sides in each of those countries. The US President Harry Truman authorized support for the anti-communist forces in Turkey and Greece in 1947. The communists in Angola captured power with the help from USSR and Cuba. In Latin America, Fidel Castro had led a revolution against an American-backed government and sought to build socialism on the lines of USSR. This inspired a large number of people of Latin American countries to fight for a similar transformation in their countries. Even elected governments led by socialists like the government of Chile, led by Allende, were toppled by US-backed army generals. The USSR also tried to expand its sphere of influence. To begin with, in 1950s, it had to face resistance of countries like Germany, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. It sent its armies to dismiss unfriendly governments and install friendly governments in those countries. In 1971, USSR invaded Afghanistan to install a friendly government there. The US in turn provided armed support to Afghan rebels who were also religious extremists. A prolonged civil war ensued and USSR decided to withdraw from Afghanistan, and in 1985 that country fell into religious extremists led by the Taliban, which now turned against USA. Military alliances. Both USA and USSR were the possession of nuclear weapons, but knew very well neither would be the winner in a nuclear war. Yet they formed military and strategic alliances. The West formalized its alliances in an organization known as North Atlantic Treaty Organization (NATO). In 1949, to counter this, communist nations made similar alliances and signed the Warsaw Pact. The alliances helped superpowers which wanted to expand their influence to gain access to the vital resources like oil and minerals, markets for their products, and places to safely invest their capital, military bases to launch their troops and weapons, spread their ideology, and gain economic support to pay huge military expenses. Arms and space race. Both the USA and USSR spent huge amounts of money to conduct research into weapons and built arsenals of devastating nuclear arms and missiles which could strike across continents. Two countries together had enough nuclear arms to destroy the entire Earth many times over. The competition now also extended into the space as satellites helped in spying and directing missiles. USSR put the first satellite Sputnik and the first human Yuri Gagarin in space, eventually led to the US sending Neil Armstrong and others to the moon in 1969. Flashpoints. As the rival powers accumulated destruction weapons, the world was constantly threatened by the nuclear holocaust. People of all countries lived in constant fear of war. There were many moments when nuclear war between the two countries seemed imminent but got diffused somehow through diplomacy. Non-alignment movement. In 1950s, the world was getting increasingly militarized and divided into two antagonist camps. The rivalries between the two superpowers for military supremacy, ideological conflicts and rivalry to gain economic supremacy led to the establishment of bipolar world. Though this conflict did not leave much space for those who did not want to be involved in either of the blocs, there was an attempt to create one. The leaders of newly independent nations felt the need for a change from the insecure and tense situation. So, in 1955, at Bandung in Indonesia, a conference was held. It was the first tense Asia-African conference represented by 29 nations. It paved the way for non-aligned movement (NAM). Thus, the non-alignment was established as an international organization with an aim to promote cultural and economic cooperation among the newly independent countries of Asia, Africa, and later Latin America. The first summit was with the culmination of the three major concerns: cooperation among the members of nation of NAM, most of them who had newly emerged as the free countries, growing Cold War tensions and its impact on the world at large, lastly to prevent any of the newly decolonized independent countries from joining any of the military blocs. Over the years, the NAM helped countries like India to take an independent posture when the two superpowers fell apart and pulled countries to their side. It also helped the newly emerging countries to bargain for space and assistance from the supreme powers by playing one against the other. To extent, it also helped to ease tensions amongst the NAM countries. West Asian conflicts. West Asia refers to the region being Europe and Asia. The conflicts that developed Arabs and Jews are often described as the West Asian crisis. It also mainly related to occupation of Palestine. Palestine, which was inhabited by Arabs, was under the control of Britain before the Second World War. The Jews traditionally considered Palestine as their promised land from where they had been exiled in ancient times and pushed across Europe and Asia. A movement had developed among the Jews called the Zionist movement, which called for uniting Jews spread across the world and to reclaim Palestine as their homeland and build a separate state for Jews. After 1945, the demand was supported by the Western powers. Matters were also complicated by the discovery of massive oil reserves in the Middle East, especially in the Arabian Peninsula. Both the USA and USSR wanted to bring the region under their sphere of influence and would not let the other country establish its control. In 1947, the United Nations passed a resolution according to which Palestine was divided into two parts. Arabs and Jewish state Israel was created for Jews. The Arabs did not agree to giving up their homeland. The policies persuaded by state of Israel increased the bitterness. The Arabs were forced to leave their homes and properties and had to take shelter as refugees in the other Arab states. The president of Egypt, Jamal Abdel Nasser, made an effort to unite the Arabs. He formed the suicide squads for causing explosions in public places in Israel. In 1956, Israel attacked Egypt with the support of Western powers, and both United States and USSR demanded a cessation of war and the ceasefire. Israel had to withdraw its army in 1967. Arabs attacked Israel once again. Israel decided that offense is the best form of defense, and it attacked Egypt and destroyed its entire air force. Israel, while refusing to return their occupant terrorists despite UN resolution, agreed for the ceasefire. In the meanwhile, an organization called Palestine Liberation Organization hereafter was established in 1964 in Jordan and added a new dimension by bringing together all different Arab factions. However, in 1967, the PLO, under the leadership of Yasser Arafat, applied pressure and force on Arab states to attack Israel. But the Arab states were not very enthusiastic. Hence, a faction of PLO led by the Arafat carried out terrorist attacks September 1972 and killing many of the sportspersons, etc. Israel used such attacks by the Palestinians to mount further attacks on them and refused to implement the promises it had made. Eventually, Arafat gave terrorism and agreed to find peaceful solution by recognizing the formation of Israel. He held negotiations with Israel to end the long war and came to many agreements regarding self-rule for Palestinians. However, this was not successful as Israel failed to implement its promises and continued to attack the Palestinians under one pretext or the other. The Palestinians are still fighting for their homeland and peace under very difficult conditions of exile and warfare. The growth of nationalism in the Middle East, the continued support of US to Israel and the plight of Palestinians created a widespread feeling against the US in this region. People, on the other hand, wanted the revenue from oil resources to be used for the welfare of common people who did not have any other resources in the desert area. In 1968, a coup took place in Iraq in which Saddam Hussein came to power with the twin slogan of Arab nationalism and socialism. By socialism, they meant nationalization of oil resources and the use of oil revenues by the state to fund welfare measures for the citizens. Similar developments took place in Libya in 1969. These regimes combined welfare policies with very autocratic and dictatorial rule of a ruler or a small group. They did not allow any opposition or democratic protest against themselves. The Taliban, which took over Afghanistan after the withdrawal of Soviet troops, similarly established an extremist Islamic state. These states tried to force all people to strictly follow the rules and laid down in religious texts. In many cases, this meant the denial of basic freedom and equality of opportunity to women and religious minorities. The beginning of the 21st century witnessed growing discontent amongst the Arabs, which resulted in the growth of religious terrorism. Peace movements, collapse of the USSR, and the end of Cold War. As the time passed, USSR and USA came under tremendous public pressure to roll back the arms race and destroy their nuclear arsenal. This forced them to hold talks to mutually reduce the stockpile of weapons, raise, and eventually to ban nuclear tests between 1985 and 1991. This was largely made possible by the coming to power of Mikhail Gorbachev in the USSR. He tried to transform the politics of USSR by making it more open and bringing about radical changes. Around the same time, the countries of Eastern Europe faced serious economic crisis and the USSR was not in a position to help them. As a result, popular movements demanding freedom, democracy, and economic reform swept Eastern Europe. Soon, the governments unable to manage the country collapsed. In the USSR, self-communist hardliners encouraged a coup in 1991 to remove Gorbachev from power. This backfired. The Boris Yeltsin resisted the coup on behalf of the Russian parliament. He eventually won the presidential elections and announced the disbanding of the USSR in 1991. With the collapse of USSR, a new era began in the world politics, the era of a unipolar world and the era of globalization. India and its neighbors. India tried to base its foreign policy on the Gandhian principles of peace and non-violence. To emphasize its determination for peace, Jawaharlal Nehru formulated his renowned Panchsheel principles: respect for each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, non-interference in the internal affairs of the countries, non-aggression and settlement of disputes with mutual understanding, endeavor to achieve cooperation and mutual respect in international relationships, promoting peaceful coexistence. India's relation with China. After a long struggle and a violent revolution, China became a communist republic in 1949. India was one of the first countries to recognize China's communist government. Both countries signed the Panchsheel Pact on 29 April 1954. During the colonial rule, McMahon Line was drawn as a border between the countries. Nehru accepted it. Tibet was lie between China and India and was to be an independent buffer zone. But China annexed Tibet in 1950 on the plea that it was the dependent state of the old Chinese Empire. Thousands of Tibetans escaped along with Dalai Lama and took refuge in India. This caused a conflict and Chinese started considering India as an adversary. China invaded India October 1962, violating the peace treaties it signed with India. India was not prepared for the surprise attack and suffered much losses. Eventually, China declared unilateral ceasefire and withdrew its troops into its pre-war position. Now both countries have strategic as well as economic advantage as they are recognized as rising powers of Asia. The two countries today have the ambition of emerging as major world economic and political powers. Thus, they also see each other as economic and political competitors. India's relation with Pakistan. After partition, the conflicts between India and Pakistan became perpetual. The main bone of contention between the two countries became Kashmir. The first war between the two countries took place in 1947-48 for Kashmir. The war divided Kashmir into two parties: Pakistan occupied Kashmir and Indian provinces divided by a line of control. Pakistan General Ayub Khan hoped to provoke a revolt in Kashmir by invading India in the name of liberating Kashmir. However, the people of Kashmir backed the Indian state in its war efforts. India responded by opening a front in Punjab targeting Lahore, and this forced Pakistan to retreat from Kashmir front. UN Secretary General U Thant persuaded both countries to agree to a ceasefire. In the beginning of 1970, Pakistan faced the biggest internal crisis. The military dictator of Pakistan, General Yahya Khan, promised democratic government and ordered elections. The elections produced a split verdict. West Pakistan was won by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, while Awami, led by Sheikh Mujib ur Rahman, swept the polls in early East Pakistan. But the government of Pakistan refused to accept neither the verdict nor the demand of Awami League for a greater autonomy for East Pakistan. Instead, they arrested Mujib ur Rahman, an unleashed of reign of terror. Supporters of Mujibur Rahman organized a liberation struggle in the form of Mukti Bahani. India, under its Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, began to provide support to it and tried to win the international support for its cause. A full-scale war broke out with Pakistan in December 1971. The war ended only after the liberation of East Pakistan, leading to the creation of Bangladesh. Later, the Simla Agreement was signed between the countries under the leadership of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Since the 1971 war, there has been no open war, but innumerable border skirmishes and battles over respective positions across the border. This has also led to the two countries spending inordinate amounts of scarce funds on arming themselves against each other. Both the countries have nuclear weapons and believe that it acts as a deterrent. At the time given to the long history of shared culture and civilization of people, India and Pakistan have often tried to overcome the hatred nurtured by vested interest and built bridges of friendship through trade, sports, films, terrorism, and cultural exchanges. India's relations with Bangladesh. Bangladesh was liberated from Pakistan with the help of Indian troops in 1972. It signed a 25 years peace treaty with India immediately after its independence. However, they have had difference over several issues like sharing of river waters of the Ganga and the Brahmaputra. In spite of these differences, both the countries have cooperated on many fronts, especially on the economic front. Bangladesh is an integral part of the Indian Look East policy to link up South Asia via Myanmar. Both have cooperation on disaster management. India relation with Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is an island country situated in the Indian Ocean towards the south of India. It got its freedom in 1948. Since times immemorial, India and Sri Lanka have cultural, ethnic, and economic relations. A major irritant in the relation between the two countries had been the treatment of Tamil-speaking minorities by the Sri Lankan government. The large-scale influx of Sri Lankan Tamil refugees into India posed a special problem. This led to the more active interventions by India, which entered into an agreement with Sri Lanka and the Tamil militants to maintain peace on the island. Eventually, India decided not to interfere when the Sri Lankan government began an all-out war against the Tamil militants. This enabled Sri Lanka to finally bring a cessation of military conflict on island.
మా వీడియో కనుక మీకు నచ్చినట్లయితే లైక్ చేయండి, షేర్ చేయండి. ఇలాంటి మరిన్ని వీడియోస్ కోసం మా ఛానల్ని సబ్స్క్రైబ్ చేసుకోవడం మాత్రం మర్చిపోకండి. థ్యాంక్ యూ ఫర్ వాచింగ్.